November. I knelt in the mud, hands wrapped in duct tape, digging the first ginseng root my mother had left behind. 6 months ago, I didn't know how to hold a shovel. Now I knew how to survive. But let me take you back to May. The air in the dormitory hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and endings. It was a smell I knew well from all the temporary places I'd lived. For 4 years, this building had been my anchor, a sterile container for the process of becoming someone. Now on graduation day, it was just empty rooms and echoing silence. My footsteps were the only sound. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. I'd watched them from my window, cars packed by smiling parents, tearful hugs, promises to stay in touch. They had bedrooms waiting for them, childhood trophies gathering dust on shelves, refrigerators covered in family photos. They had a place to land. I had a diploma in a cardboard tube, $87,000 in student loan debt, and $73 in my wallet. My entire life fit into a green military duffel bag I'd inherited from a foster father whose name I barely remembered. The room was bare. I'd wiped down the surfaces, swept the floor, turned in my key at the front desk to a student worker who never looked up from his phone. The finality of it sat in my chest like a stone. For 18 years, I'd been part of a system. First, the loosely connected web of foster families after my mother died when I was 10. 8 different homes in 8 years. Then the structured world of college, supported by scholarships and grants and loans that always felt like borrowing time from a future I couldn't quite picture. Today at 23, I had officially aged out of everything. I was free. It felt exactly like drowning. I sat on the concrete steps outside the dorm, late May sun warm on my face. The campus stretched before me, all manicured lawns and old brick buildings draped in ivy. It looked like a postcard for a life I was no longer part of. My plan, if I could call it that, was simple. Take a bus into the city, find a hostel, start applying for any job that would have me. Barista, warehouse worker, anything. My degree in English literature felt like a cruel joke. I'd loved every poem, every novel, every essay about the human condition. Literature had been the only thing that made sense to me, the idea that you could arrange words to build worlds. Now the real world was waiting, and it didn't care about metaphors. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. Probably another automated call about my student loans, reminding me the grace period was ending soon. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello, a man's voice, dry and professional, like old paper. Am I speaking with Ryan Thomas Cooper? Yes. Mr. Cooper, my name is Harrison Ward. I'm an attorney. I was the legal counsel for your mother, Margaret Rose Cooper. The world tilted. My mother. People didn't talk about her anymore. It had been 13 years. The memories were faded and fragmentary. The smell of soil on her hands. The sound of her humming while she painted. The warmth of her hand in mine. After she died in the car accident, the world had gone quiet and gray. The state became my guardian, and Margaret Rose Cooper became a name on a file. My mother, I said, my voice barely steady. Yes, I've been attempting to reach you. The university registrar finally provided your contact information upon your graduation. There is a matter of her estate to discuss. Estate, the word didn't compute. My mother and I had lived in a tiny apartment. We'd had nothing. She was an artist who sold paintings at local fairs and worked part-time at a plant nursery. We were happy, but we were poor. The state had covered her funeral costs. I don't understand, I said. There wasn't anything left. That's not entirely accurate, Harrison replied, and for the first time I heard a crack in his professional facade. It's a bit unorthodox. Could you come to my office? It would be best to discuss this in person. He gave me an address downtown. It was a long walk, but I had nothing but time. The duffel bag grew heavier with each block, a constant reminder of my entire life, consolidated into a few changes of clothes, 2 dog-eared novels, and a framed photo of my mother I'd kept hidden away. It was the only one I had. She was smiling, squinting in the sun, a smudge of paint on her cheek. Harrison Ward's office was in one of those older buildings with a marble lobby and a cage-like elevator that clanked and groaned. The office itself was small, crammed with shelves of leather-bound books that smelled of dust and decades. Harrison was a small, neat man in a tweed jacket, thick glasses, magnifying kind eyes. He gestured for me to sit in a worn leather chair that sighed as I sank into it. "Thank you for coming, Ryan," he said, settling behind a large mahogany desk. "Let me be direct. Your mother was a very forward-thinking woman. After you were born, she took out a small life insurance policy. Not much, but she invested it carefully. Then about 14 months before she passed, she liquidated that investment and purchased a piece of property. My mind went blank. A property's where he slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. My name was written on it in my mother's familiar looping script. Just seeing her handwriting made my throat tighten. It's rural, he said carefully. About 3 hours north of here. 5 acres of land in an unincorporated part of Sterling County. The property itself is unconventional. The sale was primarily for the land. The structure on it was included as is. He paused, watching my face. It's a Quonset hut. I stared at him. A Quonset hut. A half-cylinder of corrugated metal like military barracks from old war movies. What on earth was my mother doing buying a Quonset hut in the middle of nowhere? She was very specific in her will, Harrison continued. The deed was to be held in trust and transferred to you upon your 23rd birthday or your graduation from a 4-year university, whichever came later. She wanted to ensure you had a place to go. A foundation. A foundation. The word felt absurd. I thought of the $73 in my pocket, the eviction from my entire life. Why didn't she tell me? The question came out harder than I intended. Why didn't anyone tell me? Those were her instructions, Harrison said gently. She was a private person. I believe she intended it as a last resort, a failsafe. She didn't want you to know about it unless you absolutely needed it. He let the unspoken truth hang in the air. I needed it now. He pushed the envelope closer. The deed is in here, officially transferred to your name. Property tax records, a set of keys, and a letter from her to you. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The envelope was heavy-weighted with secrets. The keys inside were old and substantial, one a standard house key, the other large and industrial-looking. There is one complication, Harrison added, his tone shifting back to business. The property taxes have been paid automatically from a small account she set up, but that account is now depleted. The next payment is due in 6 months. It's not a large amount, but it is a liability. He paused, folding his hands on the desk. Furthermore, I've received inquiries about the land. A company called Stone Ridge Holdings. They're buying up parcels in that area. They don't know the property has been transferred to an individual yet. Their last offer was substantial. He named a figure, $185,000. The number hit me like a physical force. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in one place. Enough to pay off my loans completely. Enough to rent a decent apartment and live for 2 years without working. Enough to buy a normal life. They want the land, I said slowly. They want the land, Harrison confirmed. It's an option, a very practical one. You could sell it, take the money, and start fresh. No one would blame you. He looked at me steadily. Or you could go see it, see what your mother wanted to give you. The choice felt immense. The easy path paved with money and escape, or the hard path leading to a metal hut in the woods for reasons I didn't understand. But it was from her. It was the last thing she ever did for me. I have to see it. I said the words coming before I'd fully formed the thought. It wasn't logic, it was obligation. It was the need to understand the last secret of a woman who had been a ghost for more than half my life. Harrison nodded slowly, a small, sad smile on his lips. I thought you might say that. He handed me a $100 bill from his own wallet and a bus schedule. It's a long ride. I left his office in a daze, the heavy envelope clutched in my hand. The city streets seemed louder, harsher. The promise of the hostel of scrubbing floors for minimum wage faded into the background. A new destination had been written onto my blank map. Sterling County, a Quonset hut, a letter from my mother. The bus ride was a slow-motion transition from one world to another. The city's dense grid of concrete and glass gave way to sprawling suburbs, then strip malls and highways, and finally to something else entirely. The landscape softened and blurred. Roads narrowed. Trees crowded the edges of asphalt branches reaching overhead like a canopy. We passed through small towns with single traffic lights and peeling paint on storefronts. Each mile felt like traveling not just north, but backward in time. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside, along with the deed and keys, was a sealed letter, my name written on the front in her hand. I stared at it for a long time before I could bring myself to break the seal. The letter was written on cream-colored paper, several pages folded together. My dearest Ryan, it began, if you are reading this, it means two things. First, that you have become the wonderful young man I always knew you would be, educated and ready to make your own way. And second, it means that I have failed you in the most fundamental way a mother can. It means you are alone, and you have come here because you have nowhere else to go. For that, my love, I am so, so sorry. My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes quickly, forcing myself to continue. I know this place must be a shock. A metal hut in the woods. It's not a home, not yet. I bought it with the last of the money from your grandparents and a small insurance policy I took out on myself. I bought it in secret because I was scared. And the next part made my blood run cold. Ryan, there were things happening in my life before you were born, things I tried to protect you from. I was involved with a man and I made mistakes. I borrowed money I shouldn't have from people who don't forgive debts. I thought I had gotten away, that I had started over with you clean and new. But they found me when you were 8 years old. They started making threats. It was a shadow that followed me everywhere. A constant fear that they would come and take what little we had. I had no idea. I remembered my mother as warmth and light, all smiles and creativity. The idea of her living in fear, hiding this terrifying secret, was impossible to reconcile with my memories. This place was my escape plan, the letter continued. My break glass in case of emergency plan for you. I came out here on weekends when you were with friends, telling you I was at art retreats. I cleaned it out. I had plans. Her handwriting became more rushed, more urgent. You see the greenhouse? That was the key. I grew up on a small farm, Ryan. I know things about the earth, about growing. I was going to grow things here. Not just food, things that are valuable. Medicinal herbs, rare botanicals. Things that could provide a real sustainable life off the grid, away from anyone who could ever hurt us. I looked through the grimy bus window at the endless forest rolling by. I was building a fortress for you, my darling boy, disguised as a ruin. I ran out of time. The ink was smudged here as if a tear had fallen on the page as she wrote. The accident wasn't part of the plan, but this place is. It's yours. The land is paid for. It's clean. No one knows about it. It's a fresh slate, a place where no debts can follow you. My hands shook holding the pages. Inside the shoebox you'll find in the footlocker, you'll find the beginning. Everything I was saving. It's not much, but it's a start. And know this, Ryan. Every weed I pulled, every shelf I built, I did it picturing your face. I did it so that if the worst ever happened, you would have a piece of ground that was yours. A place to plant your feet. A place to grow. The letter ended with a simple, devastating line. You were my best crop, Ryan. My most beautiful creation. Make a life for yourself. Be happy. That is all I ever wanted. I love you forever, Mom. I folded the letter carefully and stared out at the passing trees. Anger and grief and confusion swirled together in my chest. She had suffered alone. She had built this secret refuge driven by fear and love in equal measure. And I had known nothing. I was the only person who got off at the stop for Sterling Crossing. It wasn't a station, just a faded sign on the side of a two-lane road next to a gas station with rusted pumps. A convenience store sat adjacent, its windows covered in advertisements for beer and lottery tickets. Inside, a man behind the counter looked at me with open curiosity. He was weathered, maybe 60, with the kind of tan that came from decades of outdoor work. "You need a ride?" he asked, his voice a slow drawl. "Not much out here to walk to." "I'm heading to a property on Old Mill Road," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He raised an eyebrow. "Old Mill ain't nothing down that way but the old hemlock plot and a bunch of trees." "You sure?" "I'm sure." He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. It's a good 3-mile walk. Take a right at the fork." The air outside was different here. It smelled of damp earth and pine needles and something wild I couldn't name. As I walked, the sounds of the highway faded, replaced by the buzz of insects and the rustle of unseen creatures in the woods. The road turned from asphalt to gravel. The trees pressed closer, their branches forming a tunnel overhead. It felt like the world was closing in, swallowing me whole. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. Through a break in the trees, a curve of gray corrugated metal rose from a clearing, like the back of a huge sleeping whale. The Quonset hut. It was bigger than I'd imagined and far more desolate. The metal was streaked with rust and the clearing was choked with weeds as tall as my chest. To one side, attached to the hut like a fragile skeletal wing, was the greenhouse. Its glass panes were clouded with grime, and many were cracked or missing entirely, leaving jagged, empty holes. The whole structure sagged with profound neglect. It didn't look like a foundation. It looked like a ruin. A barely visible gravel driveway led to the front. The main door was a large sliding slab of metal, painted a faded red, that was now peeling in long strips. I dropped my duffel bag and pulled the keys from the envelope, my hands shaking. The large industrial key slid into the lock with a grating metallic screech. It took all my strength to turn it. The lock clanked open. I put my shoulder to the door and pushed. It groaned, scraping against a rust-caked track, and slid open just enough for me to slip through. The air inside was cold and still thick with the smell of dust and damp and decay. A single bar of light cut through the gloom from the partially open door, illuminating a universe of floating dust motes. The interior was one vast, cavernous space. The curved metal walls soared overhead, amplifying every sound. The floor was bare concrete, cracked and stained. It was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. Just a huge echoing void. Disappointment hit me like a fist to the gut. This was it. This was the fail-safe. An empty metal shell in the middle of nowhere. I felt like a fool, a grief-stricken, sentimental fool who had walked 3 miles to find a whole lot of nothing. The developer's offer wasn't just an option anymore. It was the only sane choice. I was about to turn and leave, to slam the door on this entire ridiculous chapter, when my eyes adjusted to the dim light. In the far corner, almost lost in shadows, was something, a dark shape against the wall. I walked toward it, my boots crunching on debris. It was a metal footlocker, military-style, painted olive drab. It was locked with a simple padlock. My heart gave a small, desperate leap. I checked the key ring Harrison had given me. The smaller key fit the padlock perfectly. I knelt on the cold concrete. The key turned. The lock clicked open. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cheesecloth, was a single object. A shoebox, the ordinary cardboard kind, held shut with a thick rubber band. And on top of the shoebox, a sealed envelope. My name, Ryan, was written on the front in her hand. This was it. The reason for all of this. My hands trembled so badly I could barely work the envelope open. I pulled out several sheets of cream-colored paper, the same kind as the first letter. I took a deep breath and began to read. The letter started where the first had left off, but the tone was different, more practical, more urgent. Inside this shoebox, you'll find seeds, dozens of them. American ginseng, golden seal, black cohosh, echinacea. These aren't garden vegetables, Ryan. These are cash crops, valuable medicinal herbs that take years to mature but can sustain a life. I carefully opened the shoebox. It was packed with small paper envelopes, each meticulously labeled in her handwriting. I counted them. 42 different seed packets. Beneath the seeds, the letter continued, "You'll find my gardening journal. I've spent 2 years documenting everything. Soil composition, germination rates, market prices, buyer contacts. This isn't a dream, Ryan. It's a business plan." I pulled out the journal. Leather-bound, every page filled with her careful notes. Sketches of greenhouse layouts, tables of data, contact information for herbalist suppliers across the Northeast. My mother had been building something real. Bucked into the back cover, the letter said, is a bank statement I've been saving for 3 years. Every extra penny. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to get you through the first year if you're careful. I found the folded paper, a savings account statement. The balance made me catch my breath. $5,247. For the first year's taxes and supplies, her note read. Use it wisely, my love. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by the vastness of the empty Quonset hut, holding my mother's meticulous plans in my hands. She hadn't just bought me land, she had built me a future. A difficult, uncertain, brutally hard future. But a future nonetheless. The Quonset hut was no longer an empty shell. It was a testament, a monument to a mother's love and fear and hope, all tangled together. I stayed there on the cold concrete floor for a long time as the afternoon light shifted and dimmed. The grief was enormous, but it was overlaid with something new, the adult understanding of her sacrifice. She wasn't just the warm, smiling woman from my memories. She had been a warrior. She had fought for me in ways I never knew. Night came to autumn. I unrolled my sleeping bag on the dusty floor and used my duffel as a pillow. It was the most uncomfortable bed of my life. The concrete leached warmth from my body, and every sound from the woods outside was magnified by the metal walls into something ominous. I didn't sleep. I just lay there in the dark thinking about the developer's offer, $185,000. It was escape. It was safety. It was the logical choice. But my mother's letter had redefined logic. She hadn't wanted me to run. She had wanted me to have a place to stand my ground. The next morning, I woke stiff and sore to gray light filtering through cracks. The first thing I did was truly examine the seeds. Ginseng, golden seal, black cohosh. I didn't recognize all the names, but I understood the intent. These were not simple garden vegetables. They were valuable, slow-growing botanicals. This was a business plan. I spent the day walking the 5 acres. The back portion had a creek running through it, clear water over smooth stones. Potential for irrigation. The soil was dark and loamy in places, rocky in others. Trees crowded most of the land, but there were clearable sections for sunlight. I examined the greenhouse. The steel frame was solid despite surface rust. The glass was a disaster, maybe 60% missing or shattered. The wooden planting beds had rotted to mush. The irrigation pipes were clogged with rust and debris. From my mother's journal, they estimated the cost to restore it, $8,000 to $10,000 in materials. Months of labor. I had $5,247. The math was daunting, but not impossible. My phone managed to get a signal on a small hill near the road. I was about to call Harrison to tell him I'd decided to sell when it rang first. Unknown number. Mr. Cooper, a smooth, confident voice. My name is Garrett Stone. I'm with Stone Ridge Holdings. I understand you've recently taken possession of the parcel on Old Mill Road. My stomach tightened. How did you get this number? We've been in contact with the previous attorney, he said smoothly. Listen, our company is developing a luxury wellness resort in the area, and your parcel is one of the last key pieces we need. We're prepared to make you a very generous all-cash offer, $250,000. We can close in 2 weeks, no inspections, no contingencies. The number hung in the air, $250,000. It was absurd. It was life-changing. It was the answer to every practical problem I had. Mr. Cooper, are you there? I looked at the Quonset hut below me. I saw the rusted metal, the broken greenhouse, the weeds choking everything. Then I looked at my mother's journal in my hand. I saw her careful handwriting, her detailed plans. I saw the seed packets, little paper promises of a future she had planted for me. I thought of her alone out here fighting her fear by building something real. What makes the land worth that much to you? I asked. There was a slight pause. Nothing in particular, just location. We need a continuous boundary for the development. I need time to think about it, I said. Don't think too long, Garrett replied, and I heard the edge beneath the smoothness. Offer expires in 30 days. Markets change. He hung up. I stood on that hill, phone in hand, looking at my inheritance. 2 futures pulled at me. One was a check and a clean break. The other was dirt under my fingernails and the constant risk of failure. One was forgetting, the other was remembering every single day. I walked back down to the Quonset hut. I went inside and sat on the overturned bucket I'd found. I read through my mother's journal again, page by page. The soil tests, the germination schedules, the careful business calculations. She had done this alone, driven by fear. I could do it driven by something else. Obligation, respect, the need to prove that her sacrifice meant something. I called Harrison Ward. I'm keeping it, I said when he answered. There was a long pause. Ryan, are you sure that's substantial money they're offering? I'm sure this is what she wanted. Tell them no. Harrison's voice warmed. I'll file the paperwork. If they contact you again, direct them to me. I'll handle it. When I hung up, the decision settled in my chest, heavy, terrifying, but solid. I wasn't running, I was staying. I was going to take the seeds my mother had left me, and I was going to make them grow. The fear was still there, cold and persistent. But for the first time since graduation, it was joined by something else. Something fierce and bright. Hope. The work was brutal. I had spent 23 years living in my head, in books, in carefully constructed essays about the human condition. My hands were soft. My back had never known real labor. The first day of clearing weeds around the Quonset hut taught me the difference between reading about difficulty and living it. 2 hours in blisters rose across my palms. By hour 4, they had burst, leaving raw, weeping wounds. My back seized into knots of fire. Every muscle screamed, but I kept working because there was no alternative, no safety net, no one coming to rescue me. That first night, I sat on my sleeping bag with my hands wrapped in toilet paper, eating cold beans straight from the can. No shower, no kitchen, just creek water and canned food heated on a camping stove. This wasn't an adventure. This was survival in its most basic form. My inner voice, the one trained by years of education, kept asking the same question. What are you doing? You could be in an air-conditioned office right now. You could have taken the money. But I kept going, stubborn pride maybe, or something deeper. The need to prove to a ghost that her sacrifice hadn't been wasted. By day 3, my hands had become infected. The blisters had opened and dirt had gotten into the wounds. I walked the 6 miles into Sterling, each step agony, and bought antibiotic ointment and proper bandages at the hardware store. The woman behind the counter was younger than I expected, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back and intelligent eyes. She glanced at my wrapped hands. "You're the one at the hemlock place," she said. It wasn't a question. "News travels fast," I said. "Small town." She rang up my purchases. "The library has books on homesteading, agriculture if you need them." I looked at her name tag, Claire. Librarian apparently working a second job. "I might take you up on that," I said. "We're open Tuesday through Saturday," she said, handing me my change. "Good luck out there." I walked back, bandages and ointment in my pack, and got back to work. By the end of the first week, I had cleared a section large enough to see the Quonset foundation and the outline of the greenhouse. It was a small victory, but visible progress. My hands had started developing calluses. My body was adjusting. I could work 6 hours before exhaustion overtook me. It wasn't much, but it was something. The second week, I tackled the greenhouse. My mother's journal became my textbook. I studied it every night by lantern light, memorizing her instructions like scripture. The plan was methodical. Start with the frame, scrape the rust-applied primer paint, then rebuild the planting beds. Save the glass replacement for last because it was the most expensive component. I worked alone. Walt, the man from the gas station who I'd hired that first day to drive me here, checked in once a week. He'd pull up in his battered Ford pickup, cigarette dangling from his lips, and deliver supplies I'd ordered from town. We didn't talk much. He'd hand me the materials, I'd pay him, and he'd leave. But on the third week, he stayed. "Need help with that frame," he said, nodding at the greenhouse. "Can't afford to pay you," I said honestly. "Didn't ask for pay," Walt replied, already pulling tools from his truck. We worked in silence for hours. Walt was maybe 65, weathered by sun and years, but he moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with his hands. He showed me how to properly remove rust, how to get primer into the joints, how to paint so it would last. As the sun began to set, he finally spoke. "Lost my farm," he said, not looking at me. "Bank took it in '08. Worked that land 40 years. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. "Your mom," he continued. "I met her. She bought seeds from me. Serious woman. Asked good questions." My hands stilled on the paintbrush. "You knew her?" "Little bit. She came out here weekends, worked hard, didn't talk much." He lit a cigarette. "She was running from something, could tell. We all run from something." He looked at me, then really looked at me. "You got her stubborn," he said. He packed up his tools and climbed into his truck. Before driving off, he leaned out the window. "I'll check on you," he said. "Bring supplies when I go to town. Fair price." "Why help me?" I asked. Walt was quiet for a moment. "Because nobody helped me when I needed it. Maybe they should have." He drove away, leaving me alone with the half-painted greenhouse frame and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being cared for. By the end of the first month, I had made real progress. The greenhouse frame was restored rust-free and painted. I'd torn out the rotted planting beds and built new ones from cedar boards following my mother's precise measurements. The work was exacting, demanding, but I was learning. Every measurement had to be exact. Every joint had to be square. My mother's journal specified everything, and I understood why. These beds would hold valuable crops. They needed to last, but money was becoming a problem. One evening in late June, I sat on an overturned bucket in the greenhouse with a calculator and my mother's bank statement. I'd spent $3,800 on materials, paint, primer, lumber, hardware tools I absolutely needed. That left $1,447 from the bank account. The glass alone would cost $3,500 minimum. I couldn't finish the greenhouse and survive through the winter. The math simply didn't work. I held my phone in my hand. Garrett Stone's number pulled up from the call log. My finger hovered over the button. $250,000. I could call him right now, be done with all of this. I looked at my mother's journal lying open beside me, her sketch of the finished greenhouse, her careful notes about soil pH and germination times, her hope made tangible in ink and paper. She didn't quit, I thought. I can't quit. I put the phone away. The answer came the next day, though I didn't recognize it at first. I was clearing brush from the back wall of the Quonset when my shovel hit something that wasn't dirt or rock. The sound was different, metallic, hollow. I dug around the edges, curiosity overtaking fatigue. A metal panel emerged from the soil flush with the concrete foundation. It had a recessed handle. My heart began to pound. This wasn't on any of the plans Harrison had given me. This wasn't in my mother's letter. What else had she hidden? I worked the shovel under the edge as a lever and pushed with all my weight. The seal broke with a groan of protesting metal. Cool, earthy air rushed out, the smell of a place that had been closed for years. I grabbed my flashlight and descended steep wooden steps into darkness. The root cellar was small, maybe 10 feet square, with concrete walls and a surprisingly dry floor. One wall had empty wooden shelves clearly meant for storing preserves, but it was the opposite wall that made me freeze. Two large plastic storage tubs sat there sealed tight, and beside them, another metal footlocker identical to the one I'd found upstairs. She had buried her real treasure. Only someone willing to work the land to clear the thorns would ever find it. My hands shook as I opened the footlocker. Inside were stacks of cash, neat bundles wrapped in plastic organized by denomination. 20s, 50s, hundreds. I didn't count it immediately. I couldn't. I just stared. On top of the money was a thick letter number 2. I sat on the cellar steps, flashlight propped beside me, and opened it with trembling fingers. "My clever, hard-working boy," it began. "If you found this, it means you chose the hard path. It means you stayed. It means you are your mother's son, and I am so proud of you I can't find the words." Tears blurred my vision. I wiped them away and kept reading. "This is the real inheritance, Ryan. Everything I saved, everything I scraped together. 6 years of working 2 jobs, living on nothing, selling everything I owned that wasn't essential. I sold my car. I sold my mother's jewelry. It's all here. It's all for you." The letter detailed the exact amount, $31,400. "It's clean money," she wrote as if I might doubt. "Every penny from my art sales, my wages at the nursery accounted for, and legal. It's enough to finish the greenhouse properly, enough to buy supplies, enough to live for 18 months while the herbs mature." I looked at the bundles of cash, at this fortune my mother had assembled dollar by dollar. "But the money is the smallest part." The letter continued, and I could almost hear her voice. "Your choice to earn it, that's the real inheritance. The world will always offer you easy money. Developers with checkbooks, shortcuts, quick fixes. Real wealth comes from work, from owning something you built with your own hands." She explained the timeline. Ginseng took 5 years minimum to develop valuable roots. Golden seal 3 to 4 years. This wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It was a get-a-life-slow plan. "My one regret," the letter ended, "is that I won't see the man you become. But I know him already. He's the boy who stayed when he could have run. Make me proud. Fill this empty place with life." And I sat in that cool, dark cellar for a long time, surrounded by my mother's faith in me made tangible in cash and carefully chosen words. This wasn't just money. This was responsibility. Every dollar had to be spent wisely. Every choice had to honor the sacrifice she'd made. I counted the cash that night. $31,400 exactly just as she'd written. Combined with what was left in the bank account, I had $32,847 total. I made a spreadsheet using skills from college that finally felt useful. Property tax $1,200 annually. Glass for the greenhouse $3,500. Remaining materials maybe $2,000. Seeds, oil amendments, fertilizer $1,500. Living expenses at $400 a month for 18 months, $7,200. Emergency fund $5,000. Total expenditure $20,400, leaving $12,447 in reserve. The timeline was clear: 18 months until the first ginseng could be harvested. I could survive if nothing went wrong. That was a very big if. I ordered the glass, custom-cut panes delivered to the hardware store in Sterling. Walt helped me haul them in his truck, refusing payment again. "Pay me after your first harvest," he said. "If you make it." The installation took 2 weeks. Tedious, precise work. Each pane had to be measured, caulked, sealed against weather. I learned as I went, making mistakes, redoing sections. But slowly the greenhouse became weather-tight. The first rain was a test. I stood inside watching water sheet down the glass, and not a single drop came through. It was a small triumph that felt enormous. By October, 5 months after my arrival, I was ready to plant the first seeds. Following my mother's instructions with religious precision, I prepared the beds. Ginseng required stratification, a cold treatment to break dormancy. I planted those seeds in shaded beds with specific soil composition. Golden seal needed rich soil and partial shade. Black cohosh required deep planting and particular pH levels. I set up grow lights for seedling trays inside the Quonset, checking moisture and temperature obsessively. The waiting was agony. Every day I checked the trays looking for any sign of life. Day 14, nothing. Day 15, nothing. Day 18, I saw it. A tiny green shoot barely visible pushing through the dark soil. I knelt there staring at it for 10 minutes. Life from seeds my mother had saved. Her plan was real. Her hope was justified. I could actually do this. That evening my phone rang. Garrett Stone. "Mr. Cooper," that smooth voice said. "Checking in. 30 days are nearly up. Have you thought about our offer?" "I told you no," I said. "I'm prepared to go to $300,000. Final offer." The number should have stunned me. It didn't. I looked at the tiny green sprout visible through the greenhouse glass. "Not for sale," I said. His voice gained an edge. "You're making a mistake. Property taxes are due soon. Can you afford them?" "That's my business." "It's also mine," Garrett said. And now the smooth veneer was cracking. "This development ain't happening, with or without you. Construction starts in spring on adjacent parcels. 3 years of noise dust heavy machinery. You'll be surrounded. You might want to reconsider." "What are you really saying?" "I'm saying we've assembled 2,000 acres. Yours is the hole in the middle. You're blocking a $40 million development for $300,000. The math doesn't work in your favor." The line went dead. I stood there as the implications settled over me. This wasn't just about buying land. I was an obstacle to something much larger. The next day I went to the library in Sterling. Claire was there as promised, surrounded by books. "Need help finding something?" she asked. "Information on Stone Ridge Holdings," I said. She didn't look surprised. She led me to a computer and helped me pull county records. Over the next 2 hours, a pattern emerged. Stone Ridge had purchased 47 parcels over 3 years. The pattern was consistent: low initial offer, increasing pressure, code violations cited, tax liens filed. 6 families had been forced to sell under duress. "They're ruthless," Claire said quietly, "but they stay just inside the law. They know how to use the system." "How do I protect myself?" "My father's a retired attorney," she said. "Let me ask him." That evening, I met Claire's father, Thomas Bennett, at the diner. He was in his 70s, sharp-eyed and direct. "Active agricultural use," he said, stirring his coffee. "If you can prove you're running a farm, you get zoning protections. Business license, sales records, tax filings as agricultural property. I'm growing crops, I said. Does that count? If you document it properly, yes. Get your business license, keep meticulous records, make it official. I filed the paperwork the next week. Cooper Botanicals, LLC. It cost $150 and made everything feel suddenly terrifyingly real. November brought the first serious test. The weather forecast warned of an early winter storm. Heavy winds, possible snow. I spent a day securing the greenhouse, reinforcing the frame, checking every seal. The storm hit at midnight. Wind howled through the valley like something alive and furious. Inside the Quonset, the metal walls screamed. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the building shake, praying the greenhouse would hold. At 2 in the morning, I heard the sound of tearing metal. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside into driving rain and wind that nearly knocked me down. A section of the greenhouse roof had torn free. Rain was pouring directly onto the seed beds. 8 panes of glass shattered from wind pressure, leaving gaping holes. For 4 hours, I fought the storm. Soaked, freezing, desperate. I moved seedling trays into the Quonset. I secured tarps over the damaged roof section. I covered the beds as best I could. Dawn came gray and cold. I surveyed the damage with numb hands and a sinking heart. $2,500 in glass destroyed. Weeks of work undone. 30% of my seedlings damaged or dead. I sat in the ruined greenhouse and cried. Not from physical pain, from fear. The brutal, crushing fear that I couldn't do this, that I wasn't strong enough, that my mother had overestimated me. I was still sitting there when Walt's truck pulled up. He surveyed the damage without speaking. Then he went to his truck and started pulling out tools and materials. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Fixing this," he said simply. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." We worked for 6 hours straight. Walt showed me how to reinforce the roof differently, how to angle it to shed wind better, how to use salvaged materials to strengthen weak points. He wasn't saving me. He was teaching me. By evening, the roof was secured. The immediate crisis was over. As Walt packed his tools, he lit a cigarette and looked at me. "Storms coming every winter," he said. "Can't stop them. But you can build stronger." "I don't know if I have enough money to keep fixing things," I admitted. "Then build smarter," Walt said. "Use what you got. Adapt." He drove away, leaving me with new knowledge and a greenhouse that would survive the next storm. December came with real winter. Snow, temperatures below freezing. The greenhouse held barely. The seedlings survived fragile but alive. My routine became rigid. 5 in the morning, check the greenhouse. Monitor temperature and moisture. 7, breakfast of oatmeal and coffee. 8 until 4, work on winterizing clearing land, making repairs. 5, walk to town to the library, where there was heat and human contact. 8, return to the Quonset. Journal, read by lantern, sleep on the cot I'd built. The loneliness was acute but bearable. I talked to myself, long conversations about what needed to be done, about whether my mother would be proud, about whether I was insane. But I kept going. The library trips became regular. Claire was always kind, never intrusive. Our conversations were brief. "Find what you needed." "Yes, thank you." "How's the place coming?" "Slowly." On December 23rd, as the library was closing for the holiday, Claire stopped me at the door. "Do you have plans for Christmas?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "No. Family dinner tomorrow at my dad's. You'd be welcome." I hesitated. I didn't want charity. I didn't want pity. "It's not charity," Claire said, reading my face. "It's hospitality. There's a difference." I accepted. Christmas dinner was awkward at first. I'd worn my only decent clothes, a shirt and slacks from college that felt too formal. Claire's family was small. Her father, Thomas, her mother, Helen, a younger brother. They didn't ask intrusive questions. They talked about books and local history and the weather. "Heard you're farming the hemlock place," Thomas said over coffee. "Ambitious undertaking." "Trying," I said. "Trying's all any of us can do," he replied. "Most people don't even try." It was a small moment of acceptance, but it mattered. When Claire walked me out that evening, snow was falling softly. "You did well," she said. "They liked you." "I'm not good at this," I admitted. "People. You're better than you think." There was no kiss, no romantic moment, just human connection, which somehow felt more valuable. I walked back through the snow feeling less alone than I had in months. January was the darkest time. Midwinter, short days and long nights. I studied my mother's journal, obsessively planning for spring planting. I needed more beds, built soil-prepared, seeds stratified properly. I also needed to file taxes as an agricultural business. I went to the county office and officially registered Cooper Botanicals as a farm operation. It felt like crossing a threshold. This wasn't pretend anymore. This was real. My bank account had dwindled to $8,200. Nervous but committed, I ordered seeds for the spring expansion. Late January, an unmarked sedan pulled up to the property. Two men in suits got out. My stomach dropped before they even spoke. "Mr. Cooper," the older one said, clipboard in hand, county building inspector. "We've received a complaint about unpermitted structures on this property." The siege had begun. The inspector was middle-aged, gray at the temples, with the tired eyes of a man who'd seen every trick in the book. He held his clipboard like a shield. "Anonymous complaint," he said, reading from his notes. "Unpermitted dwelling commercial structure without proper permits. Possible EPA violations regarding creek water usage." I'd prepared for this. Claire's father had warned me it was coming. "The Quonset hut predates county incorporation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's grandfathered under the 1972 exemption. I have the deed records showing construction date." The inspector raised an eyebrow. I continued. "The greenhouse is classified as agricultural structure exempt under the 1981 Farm Bill. I have my business license filed as agricultural operation. Water usage is permitted under riparian rights. The creek flows through my property. I'm not diverting flow or creating discharge." I handed him a folder I'd assembled. Copies of everything. Permits for the well and septic system I'd had installed. Business license, tax filings, detailed plans with dates. The inspector walked the property, checking measurements, taking photographs. An hour later, he returned to his car where I was waiting. "Appears to be in order," he said grudgingly. "I'll file my report. No violations found." As he was getting into his car, he paused and looked at me. "Off the record," he said quietly. "They do this to everyone who won't sell. Code violations, tax audits, EPA complaints. It's legal harassment, and they're good at it. Can't you stop them?" "I enforce code," he said. "They know code better than most lawyers. They play the game, and they play it well." He started his engine. "Document everything. If they cross a line, you'll need evidence." He drove away, leaving me shaken. This was war, and I was fighting alone. That evening, Walt showed up unannounced. He must have heard about the inspection. Small towns had their own communication networks. I vented my frustration while we sat on the Quonset steps, him smoking, me wringing my hands. "You know what they want?" Walt asked. "My land." "No," he said. "They want you to quit." "Different thing." "How do I fight a corporation?" Walt took a long drag on his cigarette. "Same way you fight anything. Don't quit. That's it, just don't quit." "Yep." He flicked ash. "They got money lawyers' connections. You got one thing, you're standing on your ground. They can't make you leave. They can make life hell." "They can," Walt agreed. "Question is, can you take it?" I didn't answer because I honestly didn't know. The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of movement outside. Flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. My heart hammered as I grabbed the shovel by the door and stepped into the cold February night. 2 men stood in the greenhouse, not hiding, just standing there, bold as anything. One of them held a gasoline can. "Get off my property," I said, shovel raised. The larger man turned unhurried. "Easy, son. Just looking around." At 2 in the morning with gasoline, the other man smiled. "Mr. Stone wanted us to assess your fire safety. Lot of dry wood here. Old wiring. Could be dangerous." It wasn't even subtle. It was a direct threat. "I'm calling the sheriff," I said. "Go ahead," the large man said. "We're just concerned citizens. Haven't done anything. Yet." They walked past me to their truck, leaving the gasoline can sitting in the middle of the greenhouse floor. A message. I called Deputy Garcia immediately. He arrived at dawn, took my report, photographed the gas can. I could see the frustration in his face. Can you arrest them for trespassing, attempted arson? Garcia shook his head. Without witnesses who can testify they brought the can, without proof of intent, it won't stick. They know exactly how far they can push. So I'm just unprotected. Garcia was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his patrol car and handed me something. A small canister of pepper spray. Off duty, I'd tell you to get a shotgun, he said. On duty, I recommend non-lethal self-defense. I'll increase patrols, but I can't be here all the time. After he left, I stood holding the pepper spray and the gasoline can, understanding just how vulnerable I really was. But help came from an unexpected direction. 2 days later, Walt showed up with 3 other men in pickup trucks. Weathered farmers, men in their 50s and 60s, who looked like they'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains. This is Frank, Eddie, and Tom, Walt said. We're setting up a rotation. One of us will drive by every night. Different times. Random. I can't pay you, I said, overwhelmed. Didn't ask for pay, Frank said, spitting tobacco juice. Stone Ridge pushed my nephew off his land 2 years back. We're tired of it. You standing up to them, Eddie added. That's standing up for all of us. They didn't make speeches. They didn't ask for thanks. They just did what needed to be done. Masculinity expressed through action, not words. That night, knowing someone would drive by, I slept better than I had in weeks. March came with a thaw. Snow melted. The ground softened. It was time to plant the second wave of seeds. I worked the soil, adding amendments according to my mother's precise instructions. More ginseng beds for insurance, expanded golden seal, some faster-growing herbs like echinacea that could provide income sooner. The first year's seedlings had survived winter. They were small, fragile, but alive and growing. Still 2 years from harvest, but thriving. My body had transformed completely. I was lean muscle and calloused hands tanned from outdoor work. I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The soft college graduate was gone. In his place was someone harder, someone capable. April brought the first real proof of concept. Some of the echinacea I'd planted the previous October was ready. Fast-growing compared to ginseng, it matured in 6 to 8 months. I harvested carefully following my mother's drying techniques. Bundle the stems, hang them in the dark cure for 3 weeks. When they were ready, I contacted an herbalist supplier from my mother's list in Vermont. I sent samples, barely breathing, while I waited for a response. The call came 3 days later. Quality's excellent, the buyer said. I'll take 5 pounds at $68 per pound, $340. It wasn't much, but it was money I'd earned from the land, from work, from seeds my mother had saved. I cashed the check, but I didn't spend it. I framed it instead and hung it in the Quonset. First harvest, April 15th, $340. Cooper Botanicals. It was proof. The business model worked. That same week, a woman I'd never met appeared at my property. She was in her early 60s, nervous, ring in her hands. I'm Helen Foster, she said. I knew your mother. We worked together at Mountain View Nursery. I invited her inside. The Quonset had changed over the months. I'd built a table, installed a proper wood stove, added a comfortable chair. It was Spartan, but livable. I should have contacted you years ago, Helen said, accepting a cup of coffee. But I didn't know where you were after Margaret passed. What did you need to tell me? Helen took a deep breath. Those loan sharks your mother owed money to, the ones she was so afraid of. My chest tightened. What about them? They were arrested in 2015. Federal racketeering charges. All of them went to prison. The words didn't make sense at first. What? 8 years ago, Helen said gently, before your mother died. The threat was gone and she never knew. I felt like I'd been punched. She lived in fear for nothing. She'd gone dark, Helen explained, changed her name, moved states. There was no way for her to know they'd been taken down. She was too afraid to check. She built all this running from ghosts that were already gone. Helen's eyes filled with tears. She built it from love, Ryan. The fear was just fuel. Love was the engine. She handed me a small cardboard box, her personal things from her locker at the nursery. I thought you should have them. After Helen left, I opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were photographs I'd never seen. Me as a baby, as a toddler. My mother young and smiling, holding me. There was a sketch pad filled with drawings of this property, detailed plans made before she'd even bought it, and another journal different from the gardening one. Personal. I opened it to an entry from 2010, the year she'd purchased the land. Saw the Quonset today, she'd written. It's perfect, far enough away, enough land to grow everything we need. Ryan will learn. He's smart, stubborn like me. If the worst happens, this will save him. Not the land, not the money, the work. Work saves us. Work makes us men. Work is love made visible. I sat in my chair by the wood stove and finally truly cried. Not sad tears, understanding tears. She hadn't been running from fear. She'd been running toward my salvation. She'd built an inheritance not of money but of capability, the ability to survive, to build, to stand. The threat she'd feared was gone, had been gone. But what she'd built was real, and it had saved me anyway. May arrived, marking 1 full year since I'd graduated, 1 year since I'd first seen this place. Garrett Stone came in person. I was working in the greenhouse, soil under my fingernails, sweat on my face when I heard the car. A black BMW, expensive and out of place on the gravel road. Garrett stepped out in a tailored suit, looking around with barely concealed distaste. "Mr. Cooper," he said, "1 year. I'm impressed you've lasted this long." I didn't stop working. "What do you want?" "To make you a final offer. $350,000, much. Today." I kept my hands in the soil, planting seedlings. "No. You haven't heard my alternative." I looked up at him then. "I'm listening." "We break ground June 1st on the adjacent parcels. Construction 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. 7 days a week. Pile driving, excavation, dust, noise, for 3 years minimum." "I can handle noise." Garrett's smile was cold. "Can you handle losing everything you've built? We'll be within our legal rights, but the vibrations will damage your structures. Your glass will break. Your crops will die from dust contamination. We're not trying to destroy you, we're just building. You'll be collateral damage." He let that sink in. "You're costing me millions," he continued. "This is mercy. I'm offering you a way out while you can still walk away with something." I stood slowly, facing him fully. Soil fell from my hands. "You see dollar signs," I said quietly. "I see my mother's hands. Every seed she planted. Every plan she made. This greenhouse isn't worth $350,000 to you. It's worth everything to me." "You can't be serious." "You can break my glass," I said. "I'll replace it. You can make noise. I'll work through it. You can surround me. I'll stay. Because this isn't about money. It's about whether I'm a man who stands or a man who runs." I picked up my shovel, not threatening, just holding it. A tool I knew how to use. "My answer is no. Final answer. Now get off my property." Garrett studied me for a long moment. Then he got back in his BMW. "You'll regret this," he said through the window. "The only thing I regret," I replied, "is not saying no louder the first time." He drove away in a cloud of dust. That evening, Claire came by. She did that now occasionally, bringing dinner, checking on me, offering quiet companionship. She saw immediately that something had happened. "Garrett was here," I said. "I heard. Whole town heard. They're calling me crazy. The guy who turned down $350,000. Claire set down the casserole she'd brought and looked at me steadily. "They're calling you brave, the stubborn one, the one who wouldn't bend." "Doesn't feel brave, feels terrified." She sat beside me on the Quonset steps. "My dad says bravery and terror feel identical. The only difference is what you do with them." "What if I'm wrong? What if I lose everything?" "Then you lose having tried," Claire said, "which is better than living safe and small." We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the trees. "Is there room in this life for two?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, surprised. "This isn't a life, it's a battle." "Then is there room for 2 soldiers?" I didn't answer. I was afraid to hope for that much. June came, and true to Garrett's word, construction began on the adjacent parcels. The noise started at 6 a.m. exactly. Pile drivers, excavators, backup alarms beeping constantly. Dust clouds drifted over my property, coating everything in fine grit. I reinforced the greenhouse with everything I had. double pane glass in the most vulnerable sections, rubber seals, filtration screens for ventilation. I documented everything with photographs, sound level readings, air quality measurements. Deputy Garcia stopped by weekly. Anything illegal? No, I admitted. Just hell. Keep documenting, he said. If they cross the line, you'll have evidence. I developed a new routine. Work early mornings before construction started. Late evenings after they stopped. Midday when the noise was unbearable, I went to the library in town. The endurance test had begun, but I endured. September came, 17 months after I'd first arrived. Some of the ginseng beds were ready for a small harvest. The roots weren't optimal age. 5 years was best. But some were mature enough, and I needed to prove to myself this was really working. Walt helped me harvest. We dug carefully, preserving root structure, washing each one gently. 15 roots, 12 pounds fresh weight. After drying for 3 weeks, 3 pounds of premium dried ginseng. I contacted a buyer from my mother's list, a ginseng dealer in Virginia. He drove up to inspect the product personally. He was old Vietnamese with hands that knew roots. He examined each piece carefully, holding them to the light, checking the color and texture. Young roots, he said finally, but excellent quality. Wild simulated growing method, yes. Yes, following traditional practices. He nodded approvingly. I pay $480 per pound dried for this quality. $1,440. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof absolute. The business worked. The timeline worked. Everything my mother had planned was viable. You have more, the buyer asked. Beds that will be ready in 6 months. Larger harvest. I will return, he said. Keep growing. In 5 years, roots this quality bring $1,200 per pound. After he left, I held the check and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Security, not wealth, but the solid knowledge that I could sustain this. November 1st arrived, property tax deadline. I walked to the county office and paid $1,200 in cash earned from my harvest. The clerk stamped the receipt. I took it home and framed it next to the first echinacea sale. Year 2, paid from harvest. Cooper Botanicals. My bank account sat at $4,800. Not comfortable but stable. The next harvest in 6 months would bring 8 to 10,000. Enough for year 3. Enough to prove sustainability. 1 week later, a letter arrived from Stone Ridge Holdings. Stone Ridge Holdings hereby withdraws all offers to purchase the property located at Old Mill Road, parcel number 47B. Development plans have been reamended to accommodate the existing parcel. No further contact will be made. I read it 3 times, not quite believing it. I took it to Thomas Bennett Clare's father. What happened? I asked. Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. You cost them more in delays and plan revisions than your land is worth. They blinked first. I won, you stood, he corrected, which amounts to the same thing. I walked back to my property in a daze. The construction noise continued around me, but it was just noise now, not a threat, just background. I'd won by refusing to lose. Spring came again. Year 2. Nearly 2 years since I'd arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and desperation. The greenhouse was thriving. 3 full beds of ginseng at different stages, 2 beds of golden seal. Mixed herbs for steady income. Revenue flowing $500 to $800 monthly from fast-growing crops. The ginseng wouldn't peak for 3 more years, but the trajectory was clear and stable. The Quonset had become a real home. Proper kitchen, wood stove, bookshelves I'd built, a comfortable bed, photographs on the walls, my mother's journal in a place of honor. Claire was there most evenings now, though she kept her apartment in town for appearance's sake. We'd fallen into a quiet domestic rhythm, cooking together, reading together, working side by side in comfortable silence. One evening in April, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Claire said quietly, "I'm pregnant." I froze, dish rag in hand. "What?" She looked nervous. "I know we didn't plan this. I know the timing isn't perfect." "Say it again," I said. "I'm pregnant." I set down the dish rag and crossed to her, pulling her close. "We're going to have a baby. Here. Is that okay?" I thought of my mother building this place for a future she couldn't see. Now I could see it, a child, a family, a continuation. "It's more than okay," I said. "It's everything." 3 years later, I stood in the greenhouse with my daughter Emma, 2 years old, teaching her to plant seeds with her small hands. Gentle, I said. Seeds are fragile. Like me, she asked. No, baby. You're strong, like your grandmother. Tell me about Grandma. I looked at the thriving beds around us. The greenhouse had expanded. 4 structures now. The first 5-year ginseng harvest had brought $48,000, enough to pay off every student loan, enough to put real money in savings. Cooper Botanicals employed 2 part-time workers from town. We were certified, organic, sustainable, respected. The business my mother had imagined was real and thriving. Your grandmother was the strongest person I ever knew, I told Emma. She built all this for me before I even knew I needed it. Why? Because she loved me and because she knew something important. What? That a man isn't measured by what he's given, but by what he builds with his own hands. Emma nodded seriously, pressing another seed into the soil. Through the greenhouse glass, I could see the resort operating on the adjacent land. Luxury cabins, a spa, well-dressed tourists. But my 5 acres remained a green oasis in the middle of it all. Not in spite of the development, but because I'd refused to let it consume me. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery for the first time since I'd been able to afford a proper headstone. Margaret Rose Cooper, 1968 to 2013. She planted seeds she never saw grow. I placed a 5-year ginseng root on the grave, one of the first from the premium harvest. We made it, Mom, I said quietly. Thank you for believing I could. Driving home, I thought about the question her letters had asked. What kind of man would I choose to be? I chose to be the man who stays, who works, who builds. Not despite the difficulty, but because of it. That was the inheritance, not the land, not the money. The knowledge that you earn your place by the work you give it, by the roots you put down, by the refusal to quit when quitting would be easier. I pulled up to the Quonset hut, now painted and maintained, surrounded by productive greenhouse structures and tilled beds ready for planting. Claire stood on the porch holding Emma, both of them smiling. This was home. Not because I was born here, but because I built it, because I chose it, because I stayed when I could have run, and that I understood finally was enough. That was everything.